Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, council members. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C., and I'm pleased to be with members of my administration to present my 12th balanced budget. I want to acknowledge the Chief Financial Officer as well, Chief Financial Officer Glenn Lee, and I want to acknowledge the staff at the DC Public Libraries for hosting us here again at the beautiful Martin Luther King Library. Please give them a big round of applause. I am joined by City Administrator Kevin Donahue, Budget Director and Deputy City Administrator Jenny Reed. I just want to also acknowledge that both Kevin and Jenny are now the district's longest serving city administrator and budget director. So give them a big round of applause. The Mayor's Moak, the director of the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel, Eugene Adams, who is a long-serving lawyer for D.C. government, I want to acknowledge. Gene, thank you for your service to the district. Tomas Talamante, and my chief of staff, and also very long-serving member of my team, day one, as well as the district's first Latino chief of staff. Thank you. I want to acknowledge Lindsay Parker, also a long-serving member of my senior team and actually goes back to my Ward 4 council office for driving innovation and change. Thank you, Lindsay. And if you would just give me one moment of personal privilege, I have to say, I met Jenny Reed when I was a council member in the Ward 4 council office, and she was at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. She gave me the best budget presentation I had ever heard from an advocating at the budget. And I said, I got to get that girl on my team. And I made her my deputy budget director when I became mayor. And I will say that Jenny has just been an outstanding public servant. She knows these budgets inside and out. She has my complete trust. And she has been able, with Kevin and my city administrator teams over the years, to really present a clear-eyed set of options for me each and every year. So we go into this 12th year highlighting, and I asked Kevin, and I want to thank Kevin and our performance team for always visualizing what's in my head and getting it out. And so thank you, Kevin, for your leadership, your command of the data, and helping us have a longer than normal conversation, but a very serious conversation about our economy and looking back and looking forward and this year's budget. So we're going to start off with what I call the 12-year look back, highlighting changing economic conditions in our city and their impacts. It's important for several reasons, because I think we all have to be clear-headed about where we are and what it will take to keep growing. I also think we have to dispel this notion that the district is broke. The district is by no means broke. You can't have $2 billion in the bank and be broke. But what we are and what we need to be is more strategic about how we grow and how we spend. We have very strong fundamentals, and we have what it takes to keep growing and to drive growth. So in my view, we've been through three distinct periods in my tenure. What I call the pre-COVID good old days, where we have a raging economy, everything happening all at once, and we were actually more concerned about how we grow without displacing. And then growth was stable and predictable in that time. Then, of course, we had the COVID shutdown. Many of us were here and worked together. We banded together. We saved lives. We saved businesses. We got a huge amount of federal dollars, and we were able to do things, in some cases, things that we hadn't been able to do before. We experienced some back and forth during that time, some whiplash, but we were still growing. And now we are in our solidly post-COVID shift. We have used all of the federal dollars that came in during COVID. We are adjusting to what DOGE has done to our workforce and commercial corridors. And once again, we're navigating it together, and we're still growing. We're still growing. But now I challenge all of us to think about how we continue to do the things that we want to do, the investments that we want to make with more constrained growth, and how we take the bull by the horns to drive future growth. And so that's what we want to spend a few minutes talking about in the look back, and then we will move into the more traditional presentation of the 27 budget. And let me turn to Kevin to begin that.
Okay, thank you all. How's my audio? I don't hear myself. Okay, is it on now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try to visually say what slides I'm on. Oh, we have it over here. We're going to go through these quickly. So the budget we're giving you, there'll be a lot of discussion about reductions and choices. Context matters too, and that's what this slide run is meant to convey. In this first one, we highlighted the theme quite bluntly that we have grown as a city, we are still growing, and the question that's posed to all of us is how do we grow from here? So the mayor talked about 3 eras that are going to be visually represented on the slides as we walk through them. We also have 3 budget covers that we've had from 2019, 2021, and 2025. And that is meant as we walk through this to show how these different eras have affected our choices and what it means to be a growing economy. I'm going to walk through a few economic indicators that are often associated or correlated with growth of our revenues. The first one here, you see population and job growth. And you see it growing consistently in tandem with each other through the first period. It disrupted in the pandemic with population and jobs declining, but population rebounding faster than jobs does. The composition of both also changed. We are still federally anchored from a job standpoint, but we know we have to diversify. Our population grew, but it grew the most among young people and seniors. So the composition of both our population and jobs have adjusted, and it's incumbent upon us to continue to think about how we have the jobs numbers go back up, and it's likely not to be what has traditionally driven our economy, which is federally associated jobs. On the next slide, you also see 2 lines. This one is median home price in the blue and median household income in the dark green. And you also see them going evenly with each other during the first period of time. One was disrupted by the pandemic, one was not. You see median household income going down and then recovering, but not as quickly as home prices go up. Now, home prices present 2 stories. One is that people still want to live in D.C. It is still a choice people are making, and is driving up the price of homes. It's also reflected, though, we have supply constraints, and that also creates affordability issues, which is why over 12 years we have constructed 62,000 new homes, 17,000 of which are affordable. But you see the delta spreading between household income and median home price. So the question going forward for growth is how do we get the household income back up, going up like it was in the first segment of our era here. The next slide, you see a single line. This is one we've talked about at prior breakfasts like this, which is downtown demand, specifically occupancy rates. You see in the first time of stable growth, it hovers at about 90%. And very often our economic development strategy consisted of how do we build more density of the office market, because if you build it, someone will fill it. You see it start to decline rapidly during the pandemic, but people did not return to work after the pandemic left us. It starts to flatten out, but at a much lower rate at about 81% occupied. This doesn't mean the buildings are occupied. It means there are economic contracts for that percent of our office space. And the difference between that 90% in phase one and the 81% in phase two have significant consequences to the value of our commercial property market, significant consequences to the viability of businesses that occupy the first floor retail, and impacts on the budget that we are here submitting to you. This leads to this final slide for me before I hand it off to Jenny, which is our revenue growth. So our revenue also in the first phase grew pretty steadily. Actually went down in 2020, but rebounded quickly, both driven in part by spending nationally that occurred as the pandemic left us, but also an infusion of very significant federal aid, some of which we were able to use as local revenue supplement, essentially adding money to our local budget that we are now spending down. So even though the revenue goes up, it's not going to be aligned fully with what the spending curve you have. In that final phase, you see the CFO projection about revenue growth. It's flat. So the phrase driving growth is supposed to have the imagery of that growth is a choice. And the growth in revenues that you see here was not entirely the basis of accident and good fortune. There are choices that we made at a city to be able to allow for us to grow consistently in the first phase, recover quickly from a pandemic, and in this phase we'll determine whether we hit that forecast or are able to beat it.
Thank you, City Administrator. So I will now dive in a little bit deeper into that revenue growth. And what you see on the chart here are DC's 4 largest tax categories. So that's real property, general sales, individual income, and business income, and how they've changed over time, both in terms of their ups and downs, as well as their overall proportion of revenue that they bring in for the district. So you can see during the stable growth period, the 4 streams were growing together. They were growing in the same direction, and they generally stayed at the same proportion. But beginning with the pandemic disruption, each of the tax streams started to change for different reasons. So first, for real property, we started to see it flatten due to the weak commercial office market. As you saw on the slide before, while our residential property tax has still stayed strong, the commercial market has significantly fallen, and as a result, property tax is now growing at a pretty flat pattern. Sales taxes were hit particularly hard during the COVID-19 pandemic as businesses closed, but once we started to reopen and everyone started to go out and about again, those sales taxes started to recover, but they're still growing pretty modestly looking forward. Individual income tax has grown fairly substantially, particularly in the end of the pandemic disruption period. A lot of this is due to stock market gains, which the CFO has pointed out before. Those are pretty highly volatile sources, so they can't necessarily be depended upon to continue growing in that same trajectory. And then last, business income. While it has grown the largest percentage over time, it's still one of the smaller of the top 4 categories, and that growth has largely been driven by federal tax changes. Jumping to the next slide, it's also important to look at our revenue growth in the context of our local GDP. So we always look at our local GDP to see if we are expanding or contracting as an economy. And the good news is we are expanding, and we continue to expand every year. It also means that our revenue collections are pretty much in line with our GDP, and that we expect to see that trajectory going forward. Our next slide looks at the drivers of revenue growth. So when you look at the revenue growth that the city's experienced over the past 10, 12 years, it's important to note that more than 70% of that revenue growth is just from underlying economic activity, just from the general growth in the city. A much smaller proportion of the growth in revenue is actually due to tax changes. And so as we think about what is needed to support the programs and services that we care about going forward, it's important to note that the major driver of economic growth and of revenues in the city is from our underlying economic activity. And you'll hear us talk more about how we can drive more of that growth through intentional choices. Our next slide looks at our revenue performance. So the good news is that our revenues have outperformed our projections by an average of about $340 million since 2015. This means that DC will collect more revenues, even though our projections may show that we may collect a little bit less. And you can see even in last year, in fiscal year 25, we collected $409 million more than was projected at the time. As the mayor mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we are not broke. We have a very strong financial foundation. And one of those financial foundation indicators is our cash reserves. And you can see from the chart here, we have increased our cash on hand, both in terms of number of days, up to 66, as well as the overall cash reserves itself, which now sit at about $2.24 billion. This means that the district is very strong financially. We also still continue to have fully funded pensions, another really strong indicator of our financial health. Next, we look at our overall spending. So you can see from this chart that throughout the 12 years, we have continued to make investments in DC's future in both good times and bad. We will get to the FY27 budget presentation momentarily. You will see that it is a reduction compared to what we are spending in FY 2026, but the overall spending level continues to be much higher than it was in 2015. And then my last slide before I turn it over to the city administrator, you've heard us talk often about how 10 agencies make up the bulk of the district's general funds budget. And so we took a look at what were the top 10 agencies in 2015 and what are the top 10 agencies in 2025. And they are exactly the same. They are exactly the same 10 agencies that make up 64% of general fund spending in 2015, and they make up about 64% of general fund spending in 2025. What has changed is the order in which those agencies appear as the top 10. So you can see that in 2015, our largest agency was the Department of Healthcare Finance. That has now moved to number 3. In its place, the public charter schools has taken over as the top funded agency. You can also see the Metropolitan Police Department, which was at number 5, is now at number 7. DGS at number 7 is now number 8, and our Department of Human Services, which was number 8, has now taken over the number 5 position. It's important to keep this in mind as we go into the discussions about the budget choices, because if you're going to close a budget gap, particularly one of over $1 billion, it's very, very difficult to do without touching some parts of some of these agencies. And with that, I'll turn it over to the city administrator.
Thank you. So for the final slide, we did change the slide on the visual here. You see the growth, driving growth, now extends out for the duration of our financial plan that we have in our budget, that you will now have in the budget that we are giving to you. The green line represents the CFO projection on growth, which is just under about 2% a year. The blue line represents our historic growth, just under 3% a year. And then we put in this phrase stagnation, because while it's true that we've outperformed estimates by $340 million a year, that is not a given. If we were to extend that timeline back to the Great Recession, we have multiple years where we would have actually taken in less revenue than what was projected. So it is possible to both beat and fall short of the expectation. And the gaps between those lines is very important. That represents revenue for the budget. It represents programs that you choose to fund that our residents need. The difference between falling short of that estimate is additional cuts. And the question is, where does inflation reside within that one? Inflation typically resides closer to that blue line than the green one. So even if you are hitting expectation, we'll be in a position in future budgets where we're effectively making reductions because we have to keep up with costs that we don't control that exist in the world. So that leads me to the 3 questions that the mayor challenged us with almost every budget meeting we had, which is how do we keep families and attract new ones? How do we create jobs that produce funding for our budget? And how do we grow our economy? These 3 questions really was the lens in which the mayor would scrutinize our new investments. Those questions are somewhat eternal. They don't change. The answers have to evolve with the circumstances. So the answers to how we attract families and businesses and jobs was different in 2015 than it is in 2027. And our ability to drive growth and answer that well will be the difference between whether in future budgets we are able to take that excess funding to apply to critical programs, or we have to, or future versions of me, have to submit budgets that are tough choices. How do we do, Mayor, on that one?
You did good. Okay, so with that, let's jump quickly into our FY27 budget presentation. And before I turn it over to Kevin and Jenny again to go over some specifics, I just want to say a couple things. We can move to the next slide. You've heard me say this before, that there are so many things that set us apart from our peers, cities and states, our park system, what we've been able to do in building housing since 2015, our investments in achievement in our public schools, our investments and achievements with our public libraries, and the incredible gains that we've made in public safety. And investments that we'll talk about today have all been reflected here with this budget. We have prioritized several things: public education, public safety, preserving core services, and preserving and health care for DC residents. And finally, growing our economy. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I want to spend just a moment saying one of the more particularly difficult spaces in our budget is healthcare. And how do we preserve coverage while healthcare costs are rising rapidly? And we have been able to do that largely because of the just really innovative thinking and hard work of two of our agencies. And I am presenting those leaders with what I am calling the DC Impact Award because what they have done is so transformational and impactful. So please join me in acknowledging Wayne Turnage, the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, and Mila Kaufman of the HBS. So with that, let's take it away. We'll get into the 27 budget.
Thank you. And I just would just to add, being able to preserve health care that we have, given that we started out with a $1 billion budget gap, was an extraordinary feat that everyone at those agencies, as well as the budget team, deserves enormous credit for being able to do. So with that, here are the top line reminders before we get into how we close that budget gap. The budget we're submitting to you, the general funds budget, will be $12.7 billion, which is a 3.3% decrease from the revised budget of FY26. The majority of that funding, like it has in prior years, goes to public education, health care, and human services. The next slide, you'll see our capital budget. Over our 6-year capital plan, the budget we're submitting to you will have $11.2 billion of proposed capital improvement spending, which is a 4.6% increase from the existing budget. And almost 3/4 of that goes to schools, transportation, and metro, as it has in prior years. Now, if you go to the next slide, we will now get into the way in which we constructed and navigated closing the budget gap, but also making investments that answer these questions. How do we keep and grow our population? How do we attract businesses and jobs? And how do we do so in a way that funds those critical services? And I'll turn it over to Jenny to walk through the way in which we made choices around both reductions and investments.
Thank you, City Administrator. So you all have seen this slide before, but we wanted just to remind you sort of where we started, which was we were looking at a $1.1 billion budget gap due to fewer resources, meaning smaller year-end surpluses, slower revenue growth, directly resulting from our federal workforce reductions, and newer rising costs. Our Medicaid costs have continued to increase significantly. Our overtime costs have continued to grow. We now need to take on more of the administrative costs of the SNAP program based on federal legislation that was passed last year. Our retirement costs continue to grow. And then just like many families around the city, our utilities and our rent costs are also rising as well. So when we looked at the $1.1 billion gap, we did a couple things in order to close it. So the first was we looked for current year savings. What were reductions that could be made in the current fiscal year to allow us to carry forward some resources into FY27? That was about $340 million of reductions. In FY27, we also made about $470 million of reductions, as well as were able to capture some savings. The revised revenue estimates between September and February showed collectively about $250 million of revenue increases across 26 and 27. There was also about $192 million of surpluses and adjustments from various accounts. And then lastly, $19 million in tax and fee changes. So let's talk about what some of those cost increases were and some of the reductions. So as I mentioned, Medicaid costs continue to be one of our biggest challenges. We saw year-over-year costs in Medicaid grow about $172 million, driven largely by growth in special populations, provider rate costs, and overall enrollment, and also an aging population. Our overtime costs are about $92 million. This is largely for our public safety agencies, as we all know, have mandatory staffing requirements. And so if we're not able to get folks in, we've got to pay someone overtime in order to do the work. The SNAP administrative cost that states have to take on today is more expensive based on federal legislation that was passed. So we now have to pick up a larger share of the costs that the federal government used to provide, and that cost another $36 million. Our retirement contributions went up by $26 million for our teachers, police, and firefighters. And then our fixed costs for our DC government facilities, so things for energy, leasing, and telecom, also went up by about $26 million. So not only did we have to make sure that we could cover those costs, but we also still had to close a gap. So these are not an exhaustive list of all the reductions, but they are some of the larger and more notable ones. So the first difficult choice that we had to make was remove funding for future pay increases. This means that we had to remove funding that we set aside for collective bargaining agreements for future negotiations. We also had to look at scaling back the universal paid leave program. Similar to last year, we are recommending reductions to make the program more sustainable, but we will also need to pause in 2027 for 1 year folks taking leave for medical for themselves or for their family members. Parental leave and perinatal leave will remain as is. We are shifting away from the pay equity model. We wanted to make sure to prioritize funding for the current child care subsidy recipients and PKEEP in order to maintain access and affordability. We took a very hard look at all of our workforce development programs this year, trying to understand which ones actually do a good job of getting residents into jobs that they stay in. And unfortunately, we did not find great results when we looked across the spectrum. One of those programs that we saw that is not working particularly well is our TANF employment program. So this is a reduction, not an elimination, but we do need to focus more on those programs that are delivering outcomes for residents, and we need to retool the program itself so that it is actually leading to people getting jobs. We've also taken a look at some of our mental health and substance abuse services. We've found over the years that there's been an uptick in fraud, waste, and abuse of the system. We have already put limits on our mental health services in order to prevent that fraud, waste, and abuse, and now we're doing it for the substance use disorder program as well. So people can still get the services they need, but we're not unnecessarily paying providers for services that really aren't being delivered to residents. We are also placing new limits on DC government liability. So just like our neighboring jurisdictions in Maryland and Virginia and Delaware, West Virginia, we are placing limits on the amount of liability payouts, so that we can better control costs. Next, we are also scaling back our rapid rehousing program for individuals. We will maintain funding for the approximately 100 people that are currently in service in the program, but we'll have to pause additional entries for new individuals. And then lastly, we're eliminating our duplicative family service centers. These are centers that provide access to services that residents can access at other locations throughout DC. And now I'll turn it back to the city administrator.
And for the sake of, the mayor passed me a note with the word faster on it, so for the sake of time, some outstanding content here that you can read. But what I'm going to do is, on the left we have investments since 2015, in the middle we have key outcomes, on the right we have key investments. What I'll do and what Jenny will do is we'll just identify one or two from the key investments, recognizing that the investments we've made over the course of time have really led to some outstanding outcomes. For the education slide for FY27, what I'll highlight is a CIP that will continue to fund the modernizations of schools at the pace and expectation that people expect, as well as doubling down on what we know works, which is high-impact tutoring. What the deputy mayor mentioned to me the other day, that studies have shown that for those who go through the whole program, they get the equivalent of 59 additional days of instructional time through this program that is only $3 million. So we're being able to keep and sustain funding for that program in addition to increasing that funding formula by 2.5%. If you go to the next slide, I know there'll be a lot of interest and focus on childcare, so we have a slide focused on it. Most of our childcare funding is in the backbone of our system, which is through DCPS and the charter sector for universal pre-K. Our priority in the budget was trying to make sure we were able to fund the child care subsidy at their current level of enrollment, which does include a waiting list, as well as preserving those slots in the PKEEP program. And while we did remove the pay equity fund from the budget, we kept the portion that goes to health care premiums for child care workers at the existing level of $12 million. Going to the next slide for public safety. In public safety, we will be maintaining the core services and funding levels that all of our departments need to be able to maintain their staffing thresholds. I do want to pause, as I promised I would just talk about the right-hand box here, but just on the middle is that the investments we've made, the choices we made legislatively, have driven crime down to historically low levels. As I stand here today, we're at the exactly 100th day of the year. We have had 13 homicides. We had 2 occur in March, and that didn't even make it the safest month we've had this year. That would be January, where we had 1 homicide. And if you, as context, in 2023, a very hard year for us, we had as many shooting victims in the first 3 weeks of that year as we have had in the first 3 months of this year. So it was important. And the nice thing is that that does not always necessitate more investment. It does necessitate preserving what we've had. So most of the funding in public safety is how many can you hire? And we fund whether it's police, fire, OUC, DFS, at levels of staffing they need to do their work. We have a capital budget that maintains investments per schedule for our fire apparatus. And you'll see at the end of our 6-year CIP what will be the first availability payment for what will be a new jail that will be built by a private party, owned fully by us, operated by us. But the availability payment is sort of like a lease for a new facility at the last year of our 6-year CIP for a jail that would be constructed over the course of that CIP.
Thank you. So just a couple highlights on our economic resilience and inclusive opportunity. So since 2015, the mayor has invested more than $3 billion to build or preserve affordable housing across the district and over $1 billion in economic development in Ward 8. That has led to the creation of more than 62,000 new units of housing, including 17,000 affordable units. And it's allowed us to transform the St. Elizabeth's East campus, as well as other neighborhoods across the city, including Walter Reed, The Wharf, McMillan, Skyland, and others. For FY27, we are investing $110 million to continue to unlock economic development opportunity at Hill East, Fletcher Johnson, and Poplar Point. We are investing $320 million for transportation improvements around the RFK campus to improve access for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. $14 million to continue to attract businesses and diversify our economy through the Vitality Fund and Tech Ecosystem Fund. And then, as was announced yesterday by the mayor, $1 million to help Children's Hospital find a new home here in the district. In Health and Human Services, one of the first big efforts from the mayor was to replace the DC General Shelter with smaller, more dignified short-term family housing across the city with an $160 million investment. We also invested $434 million to build the Cedar Hill Hospital Center in Ward 8. This has led us to drive down family homelessness by more than 61%. And we've helped more than 8,200 seniors age in place through the Safe at Home program. The FY27 budget includes $2 million to convert SNAP recipients to chip cards to help better protect them against stolen benefits. It includes the $9 million to add the dental and vision benefits for the basic health plan and Alliance recipients, and $25 million to acquire a third bridge housing site along with operating funds at the Department of Human Services. Also, since 2015, the mayor's invested more than $520 million to modernize or renovate 80 recreation and community centers, 35 aquatic facilities, 105 playgrounds, and more than 851 acres of green space. In addition, $440 million went to build the beautiful Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge, and more than $305 million for trails and bike lanes and other traffic safety improvements across the city. This has led us to be the #1 park system in the nation for several years in a row, as well as have record ridership on Capitol Bike Share, which is now located within a quarter mile of every resident across the city. In FY27, we'll invest more than $430 million to keep our roads, sidewalks, and alleys in state of good repair, more than $4 million to continue our Clean Corridors initiative through the Department of Public Works, $61 million for DC government IT and cybersecurity upgrades, and maintain the $121 million to create the new home for the DC archives. And with that, let me turn it back to the city administrator.
Because some of our future depends on our ability to grow our economy and our revenues, we wanted to be really explicit about the elements here that did relate to that. And this is not an exhaustive list, but in the first part we want to make it easier and less expensive to do business in DC. So the budget will include lowering certificate of occupancy fees. It'll also include adjustments to legislative adjustments to the process by which businesses can incorporate. And we also wanted to reference existing legislation introduced already around procurement, around rental, short-term rentals, around DC hospitality that make further changes to make us a more friendly environment to create jobs in. The second item is making it more predictable to do business in DC. So in the second bullet of number 2 here, we're making adjustments and revisions to evolve the building energy performance standards to allow for more time to learn from what we're doing in cycle 1, as well as delaying the net zero energy code, but for the purpose of having new energy codes developed based on the national 2024 standards that will allow for more time to have an energy code applied both to the district as well as all businesses operating in the district. And the other element here, which is the first bullet, is I think our third time submitting this, and hopefully third time is the charm. But that's to legislatively require all district agencies to have employees in the office 4 days a week. This helps with those first floor retail that really rely upon people coming into the city. It also reflects the fact that we have very expensive leases, millions of dollars for leases of offices that are not occupied, but are paid for by us. There's a fundamental principle of fairness here where we need offices that we pay for to be occupied or for the agencies that lease them to give up those leases. So that is item 2. And item 3, I ask the mayor for
Sure.
jumping in.
So we're just really pleased to be helping Children's National think through the next iteration of their hospital, and they just are an incredible part not only of our medical and healthcare community, but of our employer community, employing many thousands of workers, many of whom are DC residents. So we have been engaged in this conversation with them for some time, led by Deputy Mayor Albert and our team at DMPED, and I'm pleased that we've entered into an exclusive period where they will be evaluating district sites for a period of up to 1 year. And you see some of the items here, and we have included in our proposal to you, helping them with that due diligence analysis with a grant.
The fourth strategy that we want to highlight is our federal properties that might be going up for sale or for federal agencies that have announced that they're moving. So the map you see here on the slide, if you look at the buildings highlighted in pink, those are federal buildings for sale or the agency has recently announced that they're moving. So if we want to continue to grow DC, we really need to redevelop these federal properties. There's already planning underway to create mixed-use neighborhoods in Southwest and connect our cultural and entertainment core all the way from Gallery Place, Chinatown to the Wharf. What this budget includes is a 20-year tax abatement for federal properties, a 20-year property tax abatement for federal properties to encourage redevelopment, with the proceeds going into a downtown revitalization fund. And then lastly, before I turn it back to the city administrator, we need to also make sure that we continue to invest in downtown and diversifying our economy. I've already talked about the importance of the Vitality and the Tech Ecosystem Fund. We are also reducing costs, expanding eligibility, and streamlining our Office to Anything program. We're investing in infrastructure around Gallery Place and Chinatown for a great visitor experience, and supporting Chinatown through the lease program and renewal initiative. And then lastly, we want to continue to make progress on developing neighborhoods across the district. I already mentioned the $110 million to make way for development at Hill East, Fletcher Johnson, and Poplar Point. There are also 3 new tax increment financing programs to implement projects at the Reeves Center, at Bryant Street, and at Northeast Heights. We're making improvements to the supermarket tax abatement to provide more flexibility and attract more grocers to underserved areas. And then lastly, incentivizing investments in 4 metro station communities through a 20-year tax abatement in Tacoma, Friendship Heights, Fort Totten, and Deanwood.
And for the very final slide, we know that occasionally, sometimes, the council has resources that are made available to it that the executive doesn't have. So we did want to put forward what we call our contingent revenue or contingent spend list. And this, in all seriousness, did reflect some of the last cuts we had to make when we thought we were balanced, but we weren't quite there, and some of the most difficult that the mayor deliberated on. And that includes, in order, the funding that we had to remove that was set aside for future collective bargaining agreements. Our employees work hard, they put themselves in harm's way, and they do deserve pay increases. Child care programs. There will be much discussion about the pay equity fund, but our child care subsidy still has a wait list, and funding ought to be, if available, focused on that affordability question of allowing families to be able to access financially the child care that exists in DC. The third is the universal pay leave program, that pause we're doing for 1 year. We do think the program should be right-sized to have sustainable revenue and benefit stream, but we took a pause for a year that we weren't planning to take when we really began this budget process. And finally, the Housing Production Trust Fund that the mayor has put at $100 million will not be at $100 million in this budget, but will reflect the tax revenue that is generated focused on this fund, which is about $50 million. That has been vital to having our supply of housing and affordable housing increase. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Well done. Well done. Well presented. Good budget.
So I have a couple questions, and I know members do. On the list, I have Wendell and Anita. There'll be more. Robert. I have a couple of questions. Can you explain more? First of all, thank you for the presentation. And thank you also that you're making this presentation today, April 10th, when the budget submission will be on April 14th. I appreciate that. I know that you were done with the budget at the end of March. But because of the delays, we have the submission to the council on April 14th. And so the fact that you're making this presentation a few days before that gives us more time and the public more time to understand, think about, reflect on the budget you're proposing. So thank you for that. And I'll make some remarks at the end and go over what our schedule is. But could you say more about, I'm looking at the slide that's key reductions, scaling back the universal paid leave. Can you say more about what that is? And also reducing the TANF employment program?
Let me start, and then I'll turn to Jenny. You will recall, Mr. Chairman, we submitted some changes, I think it was last year or maybe 2 years ago, of some suggestions we had for right-sizing the paid family leave program. Specifically, I think it was around, the definition of qualified family members and the like. With this budget, it's more dramatic than those suggestions. And we focused on how do we preserve parental, paternity, maternity, prenatal leave. And there is no change to that. In the first year, we have a pause on all medical benefits that are not maternity or paternity leave. And then in the next year, it goes back to the status quo. But what we suggest that the council consider in any change, in any reforms to paid family leave, that the program really needs to be right-sized to account for our slower growth. We have some suggestions to do that.
Can you explain the TANF employment, reducing the TANF employment? And I think I know a little bit about that there was, I'm sort of trying to lead the question here, that there was some analysis with regard to job training programs, and I'm guessing that this is a product of that.
Yes, that's correct, Chairman. So the TANF employment program, the total budget is around $22 to $24 million. So this is not an elimination, but this is a reduction. As we looked across outcomes in workforce development programs, I believe that we found a 6% of all participants in the program, 6% were in a job at the completion of the program, which is quite low. And so as a result, we are reducing the funding that we provide to private entities that provide the job training. And we need to refocus the program itself and make sure that people are getting job training or are actually getting jobs at the end.
So there are other job training programs that are seeing better results, and those are being preserved in this budget.
That's correct.
I had a third question, and this is on the 12-year presentation, the slide 10, the revenue performance. So in FY22, this is revenues outperformed projections. In FY2022, outperformed by $800 million. I recall a higher number, and I think that's because I looked at the February revenue estimates that would have been a year before, and then compared that with what the actual was. I'm guessing that this is a different calculation?
This is looking at the actual revenues that came in versus the 12 months prior. So in FY22, this would have been an estimate completed in FY21. I do think FY21 and 22 are outliers just because that's when we were coming right out of the
Sure.
COVID pandemic.
But what you did was you looked at the estimate when the budget was formulated.
Yes, and then what was actually collected.
All right. Councilmember Tranwhite?
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I know there's more to dive into for a $22 billion budget. I guess I'm going to start with City Administrator. You said that how do we keep and grow our population? I know when I first came to council, we was trying to get DC to 1 million people. I think we were heading towards 700,000 people. We never really got there. I'm concerned about the level of African Americans that are leaving our city. I think in the last census, we lost almost 20,000 people, especially for working class people in the district. I wanted to know, based on your budget, because I know, Mayor Bowser, you have taken a stance against ERAP and we're stopping the rapid rehousing program. What programs do you have as safety nets for those who are struggling to stay in D.C.? The electric bills are going up. I think we allow for increases in rent, 6% twice, which would be 12%. But the revenues that people are getting every day is not keeping up to staying in D.C. How does this? I got two questions, Chairman. So this is my first question. How does this budget speak to the struggling working class people trying to stay in D.C. and what you call the pathway to the middle class? How does this budget support that?
It focuses on how people get jobs, and how we make sure that we are attracting jobs. And one of the biggest investments that we have with people who have lower incomes is in healthcare, and it's a huge investment. I would say the second biggest investment is in schools, and making sure that we are investing in schools. But I think what we're trying to demonstrate that for all people, we have seen overall growth in the last 12 years. I think our population is up 4%. We actually did, before the pandemic, get over 700,000, and we've seen a dip, and we have to go back to that growth. The human services programs, you notice in the last 12 years, our human services agencies actually have a greater share of our investment than they did 12 years ago. Those programs include totally transforming our homeless services system, getting people through the homeless services system into more permanent housing, and to make sure we have had to reform rapid rehousing to make sure that people who are getting a rapid rehousing voucher have a chance of using that voucher as is intended for the short term, so that another family who's in need will be able to use it next. Finally, we have invested in what we think is working, 2 bridge housing facilities. This budget includes a third one that help us with people who are really struggling with housing, who may be on the street, to go into an interim facility, bridge housing, before they move into permanent housing.
Where are those located, Mayor Bowser?
2 in Ward 2, one in Ward 2, one is at 6 near Union Station.
One's in Foggy Bottom area, one's in Union Station, and we're on the search for a third one. And the budget will include funding for a third. And if I could just add to the question, occasionally we do actually survey and do studies of why people who are living here left here. And generally there's 4 reasons that rise to the top. One is people follow a job. So if their job is not in DC anymore, they leave for their job. Second is the cost of housing, which in DC is often constrained by supply and trying to add supply of housing. A third is confidence in the school system. Does it a place they want to raise children? And finally, perceptions of public safety. So I do think in all 4 of the reasons that why people who live here, leave here, the we very intentionally try to address all four of the reasons.
And one final question, Chairman. It may not be final, but for this round, I don't know if we're going to have more. You said in the presentation you had key cost increases, and I totaled it all up. It was about $352 million. Not saying it's all, but I'm just looking at that in comparison to key reductions, which totals to $315 million. On February the 10th, there was a presentation you gave us, and you listed some of the potential reductions. What's the difference in that reduction plan versus this reduction plan? I do see the shift away from pay equity model is still in there, and reducing TANF is still in there. My question is, one was moving all fixed costs out of DCPS into DGS. It means a $32 million cut in charter schools, further alliance restrictions, TANF sanctions, pathways program, violence intervention, ERAP, HPAP, and other programs. Which of those programs are stable or have been reduced?
What are you looking at?
I'm looking at the PowerPoint presentation you gave us on February 10th
Okay.
versus this one. I don't know which one's made and which one's didn't.
Okay, we can go over a couple of those.
So I think, Councilmember, I heard you mention ERAP. ERAP is funded at $7 million of recurring funds, which is the baseline. I think you also mentioned HPAP, which is funded at about $21 million, which is consistent with funding in FY26. I'm sorry, could you repeat any of the?
Yeah, it's on your PowerPoint. Moving fixed costs from DCPS into DGS. It says means $32 million cut in charter schools.
So the presentation that was given back in February was based on the budget that was passed last year. And so when we begin the formulation process for the new budget, we start all over again, right? We take that as a framework, but we look at what are the resources that we have, what are the needs that we have, what are the costs that we have. So the presentation that we're giving today is the one that is in place and proposed for FY27.
So did this changes happen or did this changes happen or didn't they happen?
So those changes, some of them could have happened, and I'm happy to follow up with you and walk through them individually, but that was last year's budget. This year's budget has been reconstructed
This was for FY27.
based on last year's budget that was passed.
I digress, Chairman.
Thank you. You said ERAP is at $7 million?
Yes.
And how does that compare with FY26?
I believe FY26 had some one-time funding. I'll get the number for
So it was
you.
maybe a little bit more.
Yes, but I'll get the actual number.
Councilmember Felder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, Mayor Bowser, before I get into my questions, I think it's very appropriate to say 12 years of bold, transformative, and innovative leadership. You and your senior leadership, as well as your staff members, truly deserve a round of applause. And I want you to take that before.
Thank you.
You know, it was about a year ago. Recently was elected on the council, and I was trying to figure things out, but I reflected back on one of our prior conversations. And I said, Mayor Bowser, Ward 7 really needs help. As the new council member, I have a lot of energy. I believe it's Ward 7 time. And you look me in my eyes and you said, Councilmember Felder, I got you. And last year, your budget priorities reflect that. This year, your budget priorities reflect that. And I just want to commend you on that, first and foremost. Looking at the decrease in operating costs by 3.3%, what that showed me is that, hey, we got to make some tough decisions. We're scaling back our operating expenses. However, on the flip side, we want to make sure that we continue to grow our economy, which is why we think it's important to invest more into capital projects, things that will grow our economy and generate the revenue that will really fund the supportive services, especially in Ward 7, that are desperately deserved. I want to commend you on your investments in Danewood, Northeast Heights, RFK, obviously, HIPS, which is very important to me as well, Hill East, Fletcher Johnson, and your investments around RFK that will benefit both Ward 6 and 7 investments as well. And to my friends at Children's Hospital, if you're looking for a location to go to, I want to be the first person to put that bid in. Ward 7 is the best location. Come on, we got space. It's Ward 7's time. Now, I do have two questions. And Director Reed or City Administrator Donahue, you can answer this question. And Councilmember White kind of alluded to this initially, but could you walk me through what was your thinking to scale back the rapid rehousing program?
Well, I think that in a tough budget, there were a lot of tough choices. There's two rapid rehousing programs, one geared towards families and one geared toward individuals. The program geared towards families stays as it is funded for FY26. But for FY27, we had to take a look at all of the programs and services that were offered across the Department of Human Services. As we mentioned, it's not only one of the top 10 agencies, but it's increased in terms of its rank in the proportion of our budget. And so we looked at ways that we always try to approach first and foremost with not taking away something that someone has, right? That's what we try to do. We weren't able to do that all throughout this budget. But we did look at what was the utilization in that program, made sure that we matched to the number of people that are currently enrolled. If someone exits the program, there is the ability for someone else to come in, but they would have to exit the program for that to happen.
Copy.
Can I just to add one thing? There's a really outstanding flow of what families come into homeless services that I think maybe at the hearing you should all go through. The most families that present as homeless don't end up in either the short-term family housing or rapid rehousing. We didn't exit people for like 3 years during the pandemic and afterwards, which is why we had this massive cost base that we had to get ourselves out from under. Most people who show up are put into what's called Housing Homelessness Prevention Program, or HPP. The majority of individuals, the majority of families benefit from basically, we don't want you to be able to have to go to rapid rehousing because that creates a cliff at the end of that time frame for it. So I do think we've added some money to the homeless prevention program, and I think that the discussion really is an incredibly cost-effective way of having families and individuals not end up in much more expensive parts of our system that we cannot sustain financially.
Thank you for that, City Administrator. And then if someone from your team can get me a list of the family service centers, I know there's been some reductions, but it just will be helpful just to know what wards will have them. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield, and I look forward to looking or receiving your budget on the 14th, and then I'll dive deeper. But thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thanks to the mayor and her team. I know that we just awarded a few outstanding members of the team, but I would like to award and thank you all for your service, because it's not over yet. But I do know that, well, this will be the last budget opportunity that I will have to thank you. And it's certainly been a pleasure working with many of you, those that I've gotten to know. I could ask us to stand, give the mayor a round of applause. You know, but she gets embarrassed behind all of that. But it's been tremendous. And I tell people wherever I go that she carries all of us on her back when she goes over to, you know, on the other side of 16th Street, 15th Street, White House. Anyway, I appreciate that so very much. And I just really wanted to say that now that we're able to extend accolades. But I really wanted to ask a couple of questions this morning. And I'll start with the most recent, I guess, matter we were talking about, and that is, I'd like to know the number and how we are moving our residents off of TANF and off of SNAP. Is that occurring, or are we stagnant? Because we talk about the expenditure of our budget, and we talk about our need to look after those that are most in need first and foremost. And I'm just curious, as we also talk about, you know, the racial component of our community and how one group is going down in population, another may be moving up. And it just makes me wonder, are we at a point where we can really show that we're moving people out of poverty? And I suspect not, because more are falling into poverty. Yet, we sit as, I think, sort of like in a little vacuum here, the district government, because most district government employees are well paid in consideration of those in the rest of the population. And as a result, I just don't want us to lose, I don't want us to lose the feeling that happens in community where most people are really caught in this community, high income, high cost, and it's very difficult to make it. And I was just wondering, when we talk about where we're going as a government, how do we put our resources so that we at least can lift 5%, 10% as we try to move forward, as opposed to thinking about maybe some other things, and recognizing that our economic growth is tantamount to being able to take care of people. So I just wondered if you had some thoughts on that and if you would share it with us. And I know I'm taking up too much time, Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah.
You started with asking kind of our approach to TANF
Yeah.
and SNAP, and we have worked over the years to look at innovative ways to make sure that people can be on a sustainable path to work, to a sustainable job, while not losing their benefits. And candidly, we've had some success, not as much success as we'd hope with those types of programs. We've invested with other programs that were like income maintenance programs that were provided through one of our nonprofits as a grant. So I think we've had some success, but I don't think people have found a pathway to sustainability in that way. We have focused on sustainable jobs where people who have no work or no work experience and very significant barriers to employment to go into our DC Infrastructure Academy, to use our Pathways program and other programs to help get them on a sustainable path. And part of the chairman mentioned that Deputy Mayor Kine and Director Morris Hughes have been focused on the programs that we're investing in that just aren't yielding results, and how do we shed those programs and focus on other programs that do. So if you look at the types of programs that we invest in our most vulnerable residents and compare them to any place around us, you'll see that, you know, we're the gold standard, from health care to transportation supports, to housing supports, to out-of-school time supports. We invest a lot, and I think you are right to focus on how do we get people to be self-sustaining, and look at some of those programs that we offer here that nobody in the nation offers.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that, because sometimes I think we forget that we're doing so much. My group, those of us at the council, I'm sure we'll come up with something new that you need to do. So just want to put that on the table. You know, it's the truth. It's the truth. All right. I was going to ask a little bit about the our workforce and how our workforce, that majority but almost 3/4 of our workforce are unionized and exist through the collective bargaining process. And they have enjoyed, increases on a pretty regular basis. But then there are the 10,000 regulars that have not had really an opportunity to grow their income. And so I'm just wondering, are you anticipating that we'll get a little kickback or a little fuss from those who are in the unions, who are anticipating that they should have and continue with their growth in income?
As Kevin mentioned, we have submitted our own contingency list, council member. And on the top of that, everybody knows how I feel about making sure we pay our people. Even in the kind of the worst and throes of the COVID pandemic, we didn't lay anybody off and nobody missed a paycheck. And I'm proud of that. We have negotiated some pretty phenomenal, I think, and fair CBAs. Nobody likes to mention this, but we negotiated 3 teacher contracts, which made our teachers among the best paid in the nation, which has allowed us to attract an incredible core of teachers, which is directly related, I think, to the achievement that we're seeing in our public schools. We recently negotiated a contract with our police officers. We had a big contract with Comps 1 and 2 that are going to be due. So if you're asking me, the answer is yes. I think we need to, as soon as we are able, make sure that we can have an orderly process by which to get to those raises. But I emphasize that we have had very little job loss and no missed pay checks to our staff who show up, and they've showed up in some very tough conditions, and we want to continue to invest in them.
Well, I wanted you to reiterate that so that the public that may be listening, and certainly our employees, the lion's share of our employees, understand that things are good and ripe here in the District of Columbia. And the expectation is that you will continue to be an integral part of our government, and without, too much, dismay. So I'll stop here. But that's where my thinking is.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. Mayor, thank you to you and your team.
Thank you.
It has been a lively dozen years, and want to thank you and your team for a tremendous amount of work over that time. And look forward to working on this final budget with you. I want to focus on 2 things, and I'll move quickly. The first is employment. Second is housing. Looking at the significant increase in overtime spending, $92 million, why offset these cuts to the operating budget to agencies and programs rather than addressing this through reserves?
Why didn't we spend reserves? I mean, we did advance about $340 million in what was that the number from yes, in 26. So we put $340 million towards that.
Okay, that has been repaid, or when?
It shows up in 27.
That's of reductions we're making this fiscal year that we're rolling into next fiscal years, helping to bridge the gap. We did not tap into any reserves for the purpose of overtime because that was not an option made available. We had to find overtime targets within the construction of the overall general funds budget.
I get your question now. We have used before contingent reserves. I think the CFO has ruled that ineligible and would not certify such an expenditure.
Okay. Is that accurate? We can't use the reserves for, to address the overtime, increase in overtime spending?
On an ongoing basis?
No, I hope these won't be on an ongoing basis. We got a lot of unemployed
Clearly, we
federal
have a
employees.
pattern of using contingency reserve for unanticipated expenses during a fiscal year. As you know, federal law requires that it's paid back.
Right.
We are trying to limit how that is used, but in general, it for clearly unanticipated expenses, like a dramatic surge in a particular program area, it is used for that purpose. But again, it has to be paid back within a year and a half, roughly, per federal law.
Okay. Well, we'll work together on that, and with the number of federal and federal adjacent employees that have been laid off, my hope is that we won't have the same level of vacancies in agencies that are leading to overtime.
I just would like to point out that I think those are different issues. Having sustainable commitments of resources to pay for ongoing positions in employment is a different matter than a surge in overtime for a short period of time. And I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly, so I look forward to the dialogue moving forward.
I think there are two conversations here. So I think the question you're answering is, can contingency reserves be used to cover unforeseen overtime costs? And I think the question you're asking is, given the roughly $92 million in being budgeted for overtime, could we budget that by drawing from one of the reserves?
Mostly. My recollection of the mayor's presentation was that a lot of the $92 million in overtime is coming because we have vacancies in agencies. Those vacancies will not be permanent, ideally. So can we, whatever portion of that is coming from vacancies, overtime spending driven by vacancies, can we cover that with
By
reserves?
budgeting from reserve.
That's right.
I think I think while it is, well, I might do it differently. I think that we will have persistent overtime at MPD. We will have it. And we could have more, which we would cover using contingency dollars.
Right. Yeah. At MPD, I think
Yes.
you'll be with us for a while. So we'll work to
Okay.
on that. I appreciate it. And still on the employment aspect, with the number of former federal employees and contractors that unfortunately lost their jobs in D.C., and permanent job opportunities at RFK, I'm thinking primarily hospitality. What are we doing in this budget, especially with cuts to job training, to make sure we are preparing former federal employees to move into permanent jobs, but also residents to work in the permanent jobs that are coming at RFK? Do we have programs funded for those purposes?
Well, I would encourage, and we are encouraging through our process, and Lindsay might say more, a lot of the hospitality work that council, as you know, directed to unions. And so it would be my hope that we're all working together to ensure that all of the union shops are putting systems in place to train DC residents. As you know, I have a great concern that a lot of those union jobs will flow out of Philadelphia and bypass DC residents. So it is important that the unions kind of step up to the plate to make sure DC residents are entering their systems so that they're hired.
Okay. I think that's another place that we agree and can
Yeah,
work together.
for sure.
Particularly on the permanent post-construction jobs, but absolutely on the construction jobs.
Absolute. Construction and the hospitality jobs are also associated with those union shops, as you know.
Yes. And finally, on housing and homelessness, it's been asked about the rapid rehousing reduction or elimination for individuals. What's the proposed funding for other housing vouchers like LRSP?
Jenny?
So there's no proposed change to LRSP or DC Flex. career map, all of those remain funded at FY26 levels. And if I could just take this moment to also say that the current budget for ERAP is $8.6 million.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mayor.
Good morning.
Thank you for this presentation and the look back. I would say that for some of the cuts that are being proposed, or at least the ones that are here on the paper, I think in some cases they do reflect some of the oversight, and so I actually want to applaud your team for hearing us in some of the hearings. We had a hearing on overtime. We talked about the need to budget it appropriately, given some of the staffing challenges that we had. The conversation around the TANF employment program, Chairman, that was at a hearing where we talked about the effective rate. It is 6%. We were $24 million on employment training programs, and we were only connecting 6%. And I had a conversation with Director Pierre around, like, either we rebidding these contracts or we got to do something different, because if it is going to become so important for people to have work in order to keep your health care, in order for you to keep your SNAP benefits, then we on the government side have to do a better job of connecting folks on that side. When it comes to the substance use disorder program, I don't want folks to get alarmed, but that also came out of oversight from Department of Healthcare Finance. We had some fraud cases. And so putting those guardrails are important. And so I want to applaud the team for responding in some of those ways to some of those things. I just want to ask a clarifying question about the Workforce Investment Fund. I know the slide says no future pay increases, and I'm wondering, does that include for contracts that are already in arbitration?
It only includes contracts that are active, not any that are not active or in arbitration.
So firefighters.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of, I know you have your contingency list. I think this is super important. Teachers got their raise. I'm happy for them. Police got their raise. I'm happy for them. We need to take care of our firefighters as well. I've got psychologists at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, smaller bargaining unit, but we don't have psychologists at our psychiatric facility. That's a problem. So I'm sure I'll talk to colleagues more about those pieces as well. I just want to turn to healthcare really quickly because I know we're expensive. I say we because the whole cluster, we cost money, but ensuring that people have care takes care of our hospitals. It relieves the pressure that is there. Thank you for holding on to the Healthcare for Childcare program, which I think is one of the most innovative programs that we've put together that other states and jurisdictions have been looking at. Thank you for the vision and dental. I feel like I've been like banging this drumbeat, but vision and dental care is super, super, super important for our residents, and so for us to cover it there. I just want to give you an opportunity. It says continue for all current participants in terms of the Medicaid and Alliance piece. Does that mean that for the FY26 levels of what we're currently experiencing, or are there some other cuts there that we're not aware of?
So Alliance is funded based on the current FY26 budget. So based on the parameters that are established today, continue into FY27. And then for Medicaid, there's no changes to what's currently funded in 26.
Thank you. I look forward to further hearings when we get the documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Mayor, for the presentation and for going through a lot of the investments over the last 12 years. One does not need to have to agree with every single decision to be able to recognize the sheer amount of work that goes into this, the dedication from so many of yourself, your team, to put this together. So really appreciate the hard work that goes into this year in and year out.
Thank you.
I wanted to highlight one item. I just didn't want to get missed in all of this. You had it as a bullet point here. It was something that Councilor Felder and I thought was really important. When we talk about the RFK redevelopment, it's more than a stadium. It is 8,000 to 10,000 new residents, new neighbors, it's new businesses, and the funding that was included in this to ensure that we have a new fire station built as part of this entire new neighborhood being built out. I just didn't want that to get missed, and appreciate you putting that in the budget because I think that's going to be really a smart investment for our communities in wards 6 and 7, and of course for all the neighbors who are going to live there. So I appreciate that.
You bet. And you will find when you get into it, there's a lot of infrastructure that is going to really, how should I say, make Ward 6 and Ward 7 happy. And it is needed. It's in many cases kind of backlogged, and there's a huge amount of investment in the streetscapes, in the bridges, and how we're going to deal with H Street Northeast. And I think everybody is going to be very pleased with it. But it is a big, I tell Councilmember Felder this, but this is a city investment. It is in Ward 6 and Ward 7, but it is a city, and Ward 5, don't feel left out. But it is a big city investment in infrastructure that I think is like a 50-year investment.
Yeah, agreed. And I know once we get the budget next week, we'll have a chance to dig more into that. Speaking of the investment, one of the things that's obviously very important for growth is our metro system, and I didn't hear that listed here. Obviously, we can dig more into it next week, but I wanted to ask, what if we are growing, and we want to continue growing and investing? We've been working, obviously, with our colleagues in Maryland and Virginia. Maryland is trying to take kind of a phased approach into the investments over the next several years. Just wanted to ask if you or your team can speak to what direction you're looking at in the proposed budget.
Yeah, I think, and Kevin serves with you on the Metro Moves board for me, and one of the little factoids that I enjoyed watching was how the Metro investment has changed over the years. I think when I became mayor, or maybe when I joined the council, Metro, it was in like the top 5, and our Metro investments have doubled in the last 12 years too. And so it is important for us. As you know, I'm a huge investor and believer in the importance of Metro to us. But I think that the jurisdictions have worked well together in managing that growth in terms of what we fund. So I think our approach should be to watch Maryland and Virginia, and we will do our fair share.
I just add when people think of Metro, there's 3 parts that you should think about. There's our operating subsidy, makes the trains and buses run. There's our capital subsidy. And then there's what's called DMV Moves, which is an attempt to try to address the fact that the state of good repair funding that we created in around 2017 is going to come to an end in 2029 or 2030. So there's sort of the 3 buckets you should think about. The capital budget for Metro is going up, consistent with the request that we get from Metro. The operating subsidy is an interesting story, which it is going up, I think 0.8 might be the amount. But Metro is overperforming in terms of the number of ridership it has, which actually took what we thought was going to be a much larger operating subsidy down to a more modest one because more people are using particularly Metro Bus, but also Metro Rail. The third bucket, which is sort of what to do in 2029, 2030 when there's a capital cliff, that's something that we did look closely at our neighboring partners. When we put our internal pencils down about a month before the official pencils down, we really needed to see, I call it like affirmative confirmation, that really was going to be on their budgets for this cycle. Remember, there's about 3 more cycles before you hit at 29-30. We didn't get the full confirmation from either Virginia or Maryland. Again, that was a month ago. They're still in their finalization processes. So therefore, it's not reflected in what we're submitting to you.
Got it. All right, that's helpful. And I look forward to working with you in the weeks to come on that. 2 other quick questions. I am concerned about the proposed reduction for paid family leave, but what I wanted to understand was, are you proposing to reduce the 0.72% rate, or is it that the rate stays the same, but the funds going into paid family leave are moving?
Yes, so the rate is unchanged, and the parental
Something's concerned.
And the parental leave is unchanged. The medical leave has a fiscal 1-year pause.
Okay. All right. So the rate is staying the same, but your proposal is to change the structure of the benefits.
Yes.
Okay.
And I entered this with a strong suggestion that if there's contingent funds, that medical portion be included again, but reformed, and that the employer portion be reduced.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then last question, and it certainly can follow up with Deputy Mayor Albert and your team on it was slide 20 in your presentation around the sale or the proposed tax abatement for federal government property sales. The lion's share of the federal properties are in Southwest D.C., and I'm trying to understand the revenues being proposed to move up into the downtown revitalization, because I don't think traditionally this part of the Southwest corridor has been defined under downtown revitalization. So I'm trying to understand that one a little bit. Can certainly follow up with Deputy Mayor Albert and your team as we get more details next week.
Sure.
But I'm a little concerned about what that means for an area that we're really trying to help develop and connect to downtown from the Southwest, which really can be a bridge between those two different neighborhoods and be part of our economic revitalization.
Yeah, so and thank you for mentioning that, because I think this is like a very exciting thing. A lot of times when we're following this, like, oh, this building sold, and we don't see what's coming because it's going to be a few years, right? But we have a whole part of our city that has been underutilized for some time. And presents us with a great opportunity to get more people, more taxpayers, more housing to mix with the commercial development. So over the course of some time, that is going to come online. And we think the district should send the clear message that we want to be a partner, and this is the way to get that done. So how the fund works, I think, is up for discussion.
Okay. Happy to work with you and your team on it. Just to help people picture the scope of it, right?
It's big.
The USDA building, the square footage of that building is roughly equivalent to the Empire State Building. It's just the Empire State Building goes up, and USDA is really, really flat. So there's huge opportunities here.
Yes, big opportunities.
Look forward to working with
you.
Thank you, Councilman Brown. Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and I want to applaud your many years of service.
Thank you.
I do have a few questions that I want to jump into. I note here that you highlight an investment of $46 million to improve youth rehabilitation facilities, including new housing units to expand capacity. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Jenny?
So that investment is split across, so 2 new housing units, one at YSC and one at New Beginnings. And what it will do is add additional capacity to address, as you know, we've seen higher placements, and so we've had to contract out for more shelter placements. This will allow us to expand capacity at those facilities.
And is it focused purely on housing, or is it programs and services?
It is mainly housing, but there will be some programmatic space in there, and we can get back to you with the breakout.
Okay. Second question. In terms of the child care subsidy program, I have a lack of understanding about when the wait list will be opened, or what's the threshold we must meet. I'm clear that we're hoping for there to be natural attrition. We're establishing this wait list. Can you just speak to when might that wait list be open, or what is the magic number? I note that you have it here on your contingency list, but it's not clear if we're investing money what that might lead to.
This is a good question. I think we also had a similar discussion at a hearing a few months ago. So this is an important clarification. So the level of child care subsidy funding depends on a few things that we project and estimate. We hope to get it right. One is the wait list is scheduled to go in effect in a few weeks. So we don't fully know how many people will sign up prior to the wait list officially taking place, but so we'll have an assessment of that once it officially comes in, I think in early May. Then we have a funding level that we assume a certain level of attrition based on historic patterns. And maybe attrition stays consistent with that, maybe it's slower, maybe it's faster. So there is a target number for FY27 through the duration of it that we have that is a mixture of working with OSSI, projecting out how many people sign up before the wait list comes in, and what is the attrition rate. Based on current level of funding, it is not likely that the wait list will be lifted through the duration of FY27, given projections we have about a naturally occurring attrition of those who are in those slots. That is why it made the list of the mayor's contingent revenue list I think right underneath CBAs.
Is it fair to say as more families sign up in the coming months, we'll have greater clarity about what that threshold might be?
I think that's correct, and I think we're looking at a program, at least beginning in late 27, 28, 29, that's around 6,000 children.
Okay. Then I wanted to quickly ask about some Ward 5 specifics. So I really am excited about the development downtown, but I have been working with the Office of Planning to reimagine Rhode Island Avenue. I want to shout out the Office of Planning and their team for working with us on that. Can you speak to how we might work together to drive development on some of our major corridors? Selfishly, I'm focused on Rhode Island. But where in the budget might we be able to collaborate on something like that to build on the work of the Office of Planning?
I think it says the small area is a new small area plan.
They studied the corridor from about 13th through Eastern Avenue.
Okay.
They have a list of recommendations. We've established a task force. And similar to what we're trying to do downtown, we want to do that on Rhode Island.
Right.
And I just am hoping we can collaborate before you run through the tape to drive development on that corridor.
So I would just like to point to a couple of things that over the years I think that have worked for us, and it's what I shared with Councilmember Felder as well. But Kennedy Street Northwest, I think, is a great example of when the Office of Planning has come in. I think they called it a retail study there, or it was a different kind of study we did many years ago now that we did on Kennedy Street. The neighbors came together, the development community came together, and people agreed this is what we want for Kennedy Street. And the way that the government, aside from doing the study, the way that the government can help that along is with streetscape and infrastructure investments, which over the years we have accomplished on Kennedy Street, and clean and safe activities, which is another way that we can do it. And as a result, the look of the corridor has changed. I think that we still have the recruitment of businesses has come a long way. The public safety has come a long way. And then there's already, I think, a business organization on Kennedy Street, and then we just really empower them to be the champion and chief recruiter for the corridor to get more there. Now, Rhode Island Avenue is different. It's broader, carries more traffic, faster traffic. So we would want to think about how to make it feel like it's someplace where you should stop and shop or walk to.
Understood. And then last question quickly. I note that included in a list of tax abatements is the development with Metro at the Fort Totten station. My team had been in touch with Metro about this, as well as the Brooklyn Metro station. And our community engagement unearthed that neighbors really care about two things: affordable housing, not surprising, but also how we're dealing with the parking lots and transit around that Metro station. Can you I know you're not going to spell out all of the particulars here, but what level of specificity or contingencies are tied to those tax abatements that we're extending to Metro? Or is that something we're going to have to do as it comes to the council?
I believe, and Nina will go over this with all of you, but it would probably attaches to the existing affordable housing requirements we have near metro stations. Those are both developments have been long imagined and not delivered, and it is a huge missing opportunity for housing.
Thank you. I will just take this opportunity to, again, thank you.
You bet.
I heard that when this is all said and done, you want to go to a fun brunch, and
Yeah.
I hope you'll take me with you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Congratulations.
Thank
Mayor,
you.
To you and to your team. I know it's really difficult to put these budgets together, doing them 12 years in a row. I'm sure you have a lot to be proud of, so thank you for the service to the district.
Thank you.
To all of us. Really appreciate it. One of the first questions, there's a lot here, so I'm going to limit myself to 4 questions.
Okay.
And I was thinking a lot about your slides around economic growth and getting our economic engine going again.
Mhm.
And as I've started to think about that and things I want to do on the council, I've often had to think about how we center equity and longtime Native Washingtonians and making sure that they have opportunities to stay in the district as we attract businesses outside of the city. And so when I'm thinking about your guiding questions, particularly, does it grow our economy so that we can fund services and programs that residents depend on, I'm also wondering, when I look at the key reductions slide, how you think about making reductions to pay equity and universal paid leave. Is that something you think, as our economic engine grows again, we would be able to fund again in the future? Or just how are you thinking about that? Just your philosophy around these reductions with questions.
So I would ask, like, how does it respond to those three questions? Does it attract families? Does it attract jobs? Or does it just cost money? And so I think when you weigh that against other economic drivers, you can see that it has a big cost, but it doesn't necessarily generate new employees to have paid family leave. I mean, I think that was what people thought, and I don't know that that's been borne out. But we think it is a worthwhile investment that fits our values and is obviously supported by most DC residents, but the program has to be made more sustainable. So I would recommend that you look at some of the things that we've already kicked around. You may kick around other things to make that program more sustainable. It is one of the programs that we fund, but most of the beneficiaries live outside of the district. So just so you are aware of that. And with the other program you mentioned was pay equity. The council obviously will decide how it wants to handle this, but I think what I hear most from families is they want more opportunities for childcare, more places, more spots, more quality spots, and they want it to be less expensive. We don't think the Pay Equity Fund does that. It's not a child care affordability fund. It's more of an income support fund for child care workers. And that's, a laudable thing to do, but it does not respond to what people are saying. We want more quality spots, and we want them more places. And we want it to be less expensive. We actually think the subsidy program does that in ways that the Pay Equity Fund cannot. I personally think that, what we're doing in the 3-year-old space and other places, and if you live someplace else, if you have a 3-year-old, you're paying for childcare. So we need to start just realizing that part of our child care system are our children going to real schools, being taught by real teachers at about over $250 million per year. So our child care system is really robust. So if we're talking about child care, I would focus on the subsidy. If you're talking about income maintenance programs or income support programs, I think there's a lot of industry in our city who would like to compete for those dollars, or you'll find another way to fund it.
Thank you for sharing your thought process there. I look forward to talking with my colleagues about this too.
Yep.
Second, regarding core services, what is your thinking around preserving investments, particularly at DPR and DPW versus enhancing?
We've done great with preserving services. So we talked about our core agencies. We actually had an increase at DC Public Schools, and that's largely reflects increases in costs, labor costs, and other costs. We have continued to invest, I think, according to all of our lists, agreed upon list about capital investments in schools. Similarly, in Parks and Recreation, we are maintaining our investments in Parks and Recreation. We include, again, request a modest change to the BEPS program that will allow for us to actually be able to deliver or you have to put more money towards these capital investments. Councilmember White has been very concerned about pool and court in Ward 8. It was bept out, okay? I have to call it what it is. And so if we are to maintain those standards, your choice, there's a cost to it. And those capital funds have to be adjusted to accommodate what community expectations are. In terms of DPW, let me ask Jenny and Kevin. I will say one of everybody's favorite DPW programs, the composting program, is maintained at $12,000. We like to see it grow and over the years. So I'll turn to you.
So for DPR, DPW, you could also include the public libraries, the DMV, all of those kind of core services, DDOT, those are preserved in this budget. It was very hard to enhance any of those great services, but we are able to preserve the core programming that everyone enjoys, the core services, making sure that we added our Clean Corridors program back, which does provide employment for about 80 DC residents. And also helps keep our city clean and beautiful.
Thank you. And then I'll combine my last two. Could someone on the team elaborate on the office to anything changes and then the supermarket tax incentive changes?
So on the office to anything, there's a couple different elements, and we can make sure to follow up with an exhaustive list, but I believe one of them is allowing for interior bedrooms so that there can be easier conversion. I believe that we are also making sure that they are not subject to first source requirements for the build out of the companies that come here.
For the pass-through. For
the pass-through, thank you. And those are I think the big changes. For the supermarket tax incentives, we will have to get back to you on those exact changes.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Fruman?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor Bowser, for 12 years of service, 3 years of partnership with me. It's been a pleasure working with you and your team. I think we can all step back in our appreciation for all that you've done in thinking in a context of, when you watch skating or you watch gymnastics, part of the way it's measured is degree of difficulty. And holy moly, the period that you have had to navigate and have navigated successfully for all of us, really, really grateful. I'm going to have a few just clarifying questions and then one that's a larger one. On paid family leave, there have been times when your administration has talked about changing it for district employees, but not necessarily for everyone. Am I right in assuming the changes you're talking about apply to everyone, not just district employees?
No, the changes I think you are referring to are the non-district program. It's the universal paid leave program.
Okay, so it applies to everyone. And to Councilmember Allen's point, we have savings, but the tax rate stays the same, so those dollars will get used in the general fund in some other kind of way. Related to that, I hear you on the TEP programs. We have focused very closely on the TANF employment programs and the very poor performance of them. Some of those are federal dollars. They're federal dollars, and they have to be used for limited purposes. Have you designated where you're going to spend the $11 million cut in TEP funds, or where do those dollars go?
So these are local funds. So we're still allocating the full federal grant to the variety of programs and services that are eligible. But these are local funds that are being returned.
Okay, so that's the local portion of the TEP program you're cutting, but the federal stays, and the federal will be used for the existing TEP programs.
And other things, yes. Right. I also wanted to just flag too, we did include in the Budget Support Act the proposed changes again to the DC government paid leave program that we hope the council will consider. I know that the council's held a hearing on this, and we appreciate that. It's very important to help drive down our overtime costs.
Okay, and the paid The pay equity fund, I mean, you have a view about the pay equity fund. I think many of us have a different view on it, and we're going to have a back and forth. In terms of trying to ensure quality programs, we need folks who are highly qualified to be in those positions, and the pay equity fund helps us to get there. My take is you zero out pay equity. It's not just a reduction in the subsidy. You zero it out here.
Correct.
Okay. There was a reference to the Housing Production Trust Fund, and I wasn't sure whether you said the taxes that will flow into it are 15 million? 50 million? Okay.
Yeah.
And the 25 million for new transitional housing or bridge housing, you don't have a location yet, or do you have a location?
We don't have a location yet.
Okay. Children's Hospital, if Children's Hospital finds a new site, whose land is that and what happens with that land?
It's MedStar's land. We also look MedStar Washington.
Okay. And then there's a reference to 340 million in reductions in this fiscal year, and I'm not sure I heard a conversation about what those things are. And I wonder if you could give a top line, or those are things that are going to hit in the next 6 months. What should we be looking for in that space?
Sure. So I'll just talk about a couple of the larger ones. We will provide a full supplemental narrative to the council on the 14th that will detail each reduction by agency. Some of the larger ones included a debt service savings of approximately $95 million, which we thank the Chief Financial Officer's office for working with us on. There's about a $70 million reduction from workforce investment. And then we also re-pivoted the contingent revenue, right, that council had proposed. We left the funding for childcare as well as the lead testing in public charter schools. The rest was repurposed, so that was about $40 million as well. But we'll provide you a full list by agency.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. Councilmember Pinto.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And congratulations again to you, Mayor, and your team. I think it's really amazing that virtually your entire senior leadership team has been with you from the beginning, which I think is a real testament to their joy of working with you and commitment to this city, and just remarkable to think back over the last 12 years of how much the city has changed and what you've led. So thank you very, very much. And look forward to working on this last budget together with you. I also am pretty moved to think about how far we've come with public safety. In 2023, when we sat and had this conversation, I think every single member talked about public safety, and I don't think it's come up yet today. And that is because it is not on people's mind the way it was, because you have gotten such a great handle on driving down crime. So we can now focus on all of the other important things that we need to as a city. And I want to just give Deputy Mayor Apia and Chief Carroll a huge shout out and gratitude. It's really amazing and should not be taken for granted. And we need to make sure that those investments continue. Thank you very much for the funding for the additional bridge housing site. This is really important. It's been an amazing program that we started together as a model in Ward 2 and has been expanded, and I think is going to continue offering a fantastic transitional opportunity for people. So I'm thrilled to hear that. Two topics I want to cover. First, on safety. As we continue to invest in our public safety ecosystem and try to rebuild our police department, hire more officers, you know, we have a lot of competitive issues that we're dealing with other agencies, but one of the things that we can continue investing in is the infrastructure and spaces where our officers and firefighters sit. And so how does this budget contemplate renovations, needed renovations for our MPD substations and firehouses? And also, can you speak more to the planned timeline for the renovation of the DC jail and how this leaseback structure will enable us to start that construction as soon as possible?
Sure. Okay. So in terms of facilities for both fire and EMS as well as MPD. So for MPD, We continue funding the renovation of the 7D headquarters. There's also funding to complete the renovation of all the detention areas in the stations. There is continued funding for small cap improvements that the agency identifies each year that are needed. A big investment, while it's not a building, is fleet. So we continue to invest both for MPD and fire and EMS, their full request for fleet. One of the biggest investments that we've made most recently for fire and EMS is the new fleet maintenance facility that will be over near Blue Plains. That is broken ground, and that did require the addition of some funds in FY27 and 28 to complete that project. There's the new fire station at RFK that was noted, as well as the completion of some of the fire stations that have been in progress. And of course, the replacement of the fireboat, which the chief says does count as a new fire station, the John Glenn.
And in regards to your question about the jail, and I also recognize we had this discussion, I think, a year ago, as you nod your head. So on or about May 15th, there'll be, DGS will formally issue a request for interest to be able to identify the universe of entities, private companies, that have experience building structures of this size and complexity, particularly structures that have an inherent public use. It did take a lot of time between last year and now to really work out exactly what the rules and parameters would be. But the basic idea for everyone is that there are some structures that are so large and complicated that they are sometimes, if not often, done by private entities. Jail is one example. Airports are the most common example, even though an authority will own the airport at the end of it. And there's two ways we can do that. The traditional way is for us to set aside in the existing CIP what will amount to about $1.4 or $1.7 billion. And being realistic with how that would then have to compete over a span of the construction schedule. So over the span of 5 or 6 years, it's not realistic to assume that you can fit that volume into a capital CIP given all the competing needs across the whole city. So the value of doing it in this structure is that effectively your capital payments are spread out over the course of essentially a lease. That is typically lasts about 30 years. And in which, in giving the lease to the private entity values that consistent stream of revenue that's consistent. They're sometimes backed by pension funds that sort of want to have that consistent stream of revenue. And we pay back that entity for the cost of constructing the jail, their borrowing costs, and a transparent sort of margin in addition to that. And that's spread out over the 30 years. So what's in this budget is in year 6 of the 6-year CIP, which would be the earliest the first phase of a new jail could be delivered. There would have to be an availability payment, and that's reflected in year 6 in the amount of about $75 million.
But sorry, is that year 6 investment when the payment will become due or when the construction will be initiated?
When the construction of the first phase would be completed, and therefore the first payment, sort of the availability payment, would be due to the entity that would build it. And the amount was based on an assessment that DGS have hired contractors who have had done work in this space, have estimated what the likely payment would be for that first phase of a new jail being delivered.
Okay, I'll look forward to working together.
Yes, but I want to emphasize that a lot has been done. I would have liked to have a shovel on the ground on the jail before January because it is important. The community outreach, a design of how it can work with our population, anticipating that more of our residents would be able to finish their sentences in DC so that they can re-enter better, I think is the promise of this jail. It will be more efficient space, which means less overtime for DOC, more safety for our employees there, and better outcomes for our residents who are returning. So it is, my great request that this stays on schedule. And so I think, will be able to have something really good to build on, but we can't lose it.
Yeah, Agreed, and I'm glad you mentioned all of the effort that's gone into the design planning. I think that'll be an important part of the next stage, even though the financing structure will look different, to ensure that all of that work and feedback is still a part of this plan. So thank you. And then there's a lot of great things I see in here that will support the economy. I'm really excited to see funding for the Vitality Fund, for the tech ecosystem, and to continue expanding the types of industries that we're proactively welcoming to the district. When we think about connecting the neighborhoods from downtown all the way to the wharf, I'm excited to see some targeted investments with the tax abatement processes. Can you talk about how you're thinking about incentivizing investment from the private sector to be a part of that connection? So not all of these buildings will necessarily be in best use by our government. Some may need to be in the private sector, but how we're ensuring that we're leading that bird's eye view perspective of connecting those neighborhoods.
Well, I think that the planning that we're undertaking is very important. Anina, myself, we're very engaged with how GSA is thinking about it, with our Office of Planning and how they're thinking about it. But there's some things you'll see in this budget, and there's some things that you also have control over. We have to be a good place for investment. We have to be. And so investors are looking at how we change our business taxes. They're looking at how, people pay rent in our city. They're looking at all of these things about the ease of doing business in our city. Now, I think what we're presenting is going to become a new premier place to invest. It's going to give us more opportunity for housing. But I do think that part of what we do in terms of incentives can't be counteracted by what people think is an unpredictable business environment. So I would just caution you with that. The chairman and I were at an event recently where the board of directors of a major company was meeting in Virginia. They should have been in D.C. But the first thing the CEO said is, "We love Virginia. It's so business friendly." You heard that, right, Phil? And I thought to myself, okay, it's not enough that we lost this headquarters, but it's this perception that just across a bridge, I could see it from my office, it's easier. So we're not going to be, we're Washington, D.C., but I just don't ever want to leave people with the impression that it doesn't matter what our laws are, what our taxes are, how our business climate is perceived. It matters more than ever right now.
Well, thank you, and agree. And I think those of us around this table are all really important messengers for that as well. We can change the policy environment, and we all need to be consistent messengers that we are the best place in the country to do business, and we welcome businesses to grow here. There's been some discussion around the Downtown Revitalization Fund, so I just want to say to colleagues, and I know I'm a little biased given that I represent downtown, but I don't want any of us to think about downtown as like a this or that of another neighborhood. Downtown is where over half of the people in the city work, where we generate so much of our taxes to fund everything else. And so I know we know that, but as we think about the investments in this budget, I don't want it to be in competition with those other neighborhood investments that are also important, but the function of ensuring that that fund is robust is different. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations,
Thank you.
Mayor and team. Will the proposed budget maintain or increase the earned income tax credit, and does it retain the child tax credit?
It does not retain the child tax credit, and it does continue the funding for the EITC expansion for those who filed in tax year 25, but it does not continue it in tax year 26 and beyond.
Okay, so for 26 and beyond, it's at 85% or lower?
It's at, I believe it's 85%, whatever it was increased from.
Okay. I want to dig a little deeper on some of the childcare stuff. We've had a lot of questions about this, but I'm hoping to just get a little more information. So the FY27 budget for the subsidy program is at least $26 million less than what OSSI projects it will spend this year. So does the budget or the BSA reflect any policy changes to the subsidy program other than the forthcoming waitlist?
There's also the elimination of the tiered rate structure, so providers are all paid at the base rate for additional cost savings.
Okay. And can you clarify in the supplemental budget how much you're adding to the subsidy program?
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
I think it's about 35 million, but let me check.
Okay.
That would be adding over FY26.
For this, yeah, in the supplemental, yeah.
33 million.
Okay, so that includes the 5.5 million from the council contingency list?
That is above and beyond what the council contingency list included. So
it's 40?
Roughly, because it's the 2.5 plus the 5. So the 2.5 that was for pay equity and the 5 for childcare remain in OSSI. And then we added an additional 33 million on top of that.
Okay. Is it your understanding that the actual spend is supposed to be around 138 million through the remainder of the year?
It is estimated to be about 139 million.
Okay.
Yep.
So do we have all those funds in place, or are we going to have to stop paying out in June when that runs out?
No, that should be sufficient to get us through the rest of the fiscal year.
Okay.
With the wait list.
With a
With
wait.
the implementation of a wait list, yes, that's correct.
And with the elimination of the pay equity fund, is it your expectation that childcare facilities will reduce educator salaries back to the pre-fund levels, or are you anticipating facilities will raise parent tuition to cover the $10,000 to $20,000 salary increases that educators have become accustomed to over the past 5 years?
Well, the child care facilities did not lower child care costs when the government took on their labor costs. So I don't know that I can anticipate what they'll do.
Right. Well, it wasn't intended to lower. It was intended to retain staff to ensure that we can have those quality slots that you're focused on, right? I mean, it's an ecosystem we're building.
The intention, I think, was to raise salaries.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Well, my fear, of course, and now the budget will be with us, is that we will not be able to retain the educators to expand all those slots that we need across the city that I think you've identified are the priority for families because they all go together. So we'll have to work together as a council to address that. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
You bet.
That goes through all the council members. I don't really want a second round. I don't think any of us want a second round. But I'm looking in case there's something really, really important, not seeing it. Let me give some closing remarks, if I may.
Of course.
So first, Mayor Bowser, I want to acknowledge that your staff, meaning the city administrator and budget director, Jenny Reed, and Kevin Donahue, have been very cooperative with us over the last couple of months, and that has been very helpful to the budget director as we try to get ready for dealing with this budget. And I do know that there are going to be some disagreements between council members and your proposal, but of course that is always the case. But I also want to just recognize that you had some constraints with regard to access to dollars that made your choices more difficult. And so I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
I want to, since you were busy thanking folks at the beginning, I do want to thank our budget director, Jen Budoff. I'm not going to be able to thank everybody, but Ann Phelps, who's the budget counsel, and Andy Eisenlohr, who's I believe, the deputy budget director. I get the titles sometimes confused, but and actually the entire council budget staff, which works for all the council members, puts in a lot of work, and so I just want to acknowledge and thank them for that. I also want to just repeat a theme that you made at the beginning, Mayor Bowser, that we're looking at a budget with some tough choices in it and some cuts that none of us like, but it's not because the city is in financial trouble. Our revenues continue to grow. The Chief Financial Officer's revenue estimates show that our revenues continue to grow. As I recall, our population is growing. We are seeing we're getting near the end of the downward whatever from commercial real estate because of the pandemic. So we really do have a strong city. It's just that we have to work within these constraints. So I wanted to just reiterate what you've been saying in that regard. Our schedule is that you will be formally transmitting the budget to the council on April 14th. And we picked that date because that then allows us to have our 56th and 70th day votes, not on the same day as the primary election, which would be a little difficult for a couple of members. The hearings for the council will begin, the public hearings will begin on April 20th, and the last public hearing by committees will be on May 12th. The committee of the whole will have a hearing on all of the budget documents. This is the formal requisite hearing on May 13th. The work session right now for council members is scheduled for May 27th, which is 2 days after Memorial Day. And our first reading or first vote will be June 9th, and the second vote will be June 23rd. So I hope anybody who's running for office is not expecting to take a 2 or 3 week cruise after the primary, because you'll miss the second vote. I do want to ask if it's possible, and I'm directing this to the Chief Financial Officer, since the mayor has now presented her budget, if you could have the budget chapters published online today instead of waiting until Wednesday when the books are, or Tuesday when the books are published.
I don't know if that can happen today. We're virtually done. Of course, we were originally aiming for the 10th. You changed the schedule when you changed the starting date, so let me check.
Yes, but the chapters, of course, have all been submitted to the printer because they're being printed.
Exactly.
And they'll be ready on Tuesday. And I think it would be a great service to the public, as well as helpful to the council members, if the chapters could be available today. If not today, then over the weekend, so folks can start looking at the detail. That would be great. Again, Mayor Bowser, I want to thank you and all of your team for the work that you've been doing. And we look forward to the next 56 days of happiness.
Happiness. Thank you all.